Yes, hello everyone, and it's a great pleasure to be speaking to you today from Cambridge. Great. I'm disappointed that I can't join you in person, but I'm very pleased that you've asked me to speak about this. So what I'm going to do is I'll talk about both European modelling of what might happen to the electricity system with additional amounts of renewable energy, and I'll also talk a little bit about recent experiences with renewable energy in Great Britain. So let me just outline what I'm going to look at. What I'm going to do is I'll start off by talking about what renewables mean for electricity markets and how electricity market design might need to change in the near future. Then I'll talk about how much renewables we might have in a net zero energy system in Europe. And it turns out that renewables will be extremely significant in future electricity systems. And then I'm going to end up by talking about experiences with adding wind and solar to the electricity system in Great Britain, and indeed what that has meant for ancillary service markets of the type that Mr. Ito was talking about. So let me start off by talking about renewables and what they mean for electricity market design and electricity market prices. What happens with renewables is that, as was mentioned earlier, they can be zero marginal cost in the short run, and that would seem to pose a problem for existing electricity markets which are premised on non-zero marginal costs associated with fossil fuels. And seeing we have existing wholesale electricity markets which are based on high marginal costs and which have been designed around that type of fuel, that might seem to suggest that we will need another type of electricity market which allows the right incentives to be introduced for investing in renewables in the first place, but also for making sure that we've got enough reserves on the system. And so when we were thinking about this going forward, we were thinking, well, what is going to happen to electricity prices in Europe in the next few years? Because if electricity prices were to often be zero, because of the addition of renewables, and to be extremely volatile, and to provide a bad investment signal for new renewables being added to the electricity system, clearly we would have to change the existing market design. So when we think about this in terms of the timetable for changing market design, if we're going to change the market design by, say, 2030, we'd need to be thinking about, well, what are the prices going to be in the mid 2020s, because they'll be the prices that politicians will be interested in driving political pressure to change market design. What this gives rise to is three potential questions to do with the future of European electricity market design, and how is the market working as we roll out more renewables is the first question. Could we just adapt the market as we go along, perhaps with the introduction of capacity markets and better ancillary service markets to make sure that we have enough capacity to support renewable generation? And as this rollout of renewables continues, will there be a sudden change to prices? Will the average price in the wholesale market suddenly collapse and no longer support the addition of new renewables or the maintenance of reserve capacity? these are all things which it's possible to model. And indeed, that's what we're going on to look at. And indeed, those three questions suggest three options for the future, which are to do with a continuation of the current market design, a gradual evolution of the market design with the introduction of more ancillary service markets or better ancillary service markets that better incentivize the sorts of frequency response issues that we've just heard about, or the maintenance of longer term reserve capacity, or indeed might we just have to completely rethink market design. And, you know, a complete rethink of market design in the context of intermittent renewables would involve, say, internet-based allocation of capacity, where we might pay for electricity under long-term contracts, but in the short run, we allocate it according to availability of electricity and priorities attached to different loads, rather than some market-based pricing in the short run. So what we did to think about the 2025 market situation, which might drive future market design, was one of my colleagues, Cambridge, Kong Cheong, and I did some modeling of the 2025 electricity market in Europe to look at, well, what might happen to prices as you add a lot more intermittent renewable generation. And of course, it's not altogether clear that prices will collapse. That's important to say, because there are two things going on. It's true that as you add more variable renewable electricity, wind and solar, the marginal cost drops, and the residual demand, which is met by zero marginal cost generators, falls. That's true. So that is the merit order effect, which people often focus on. But of course, there may be other things going on. The carbon price may be going up, and indeed the price of gas, which has risen very much recently, might also go up, and that would create a fuel price effect, which would drive up the marginal cost, so that a lot of the time, the marginal cost of the existing electricity system, even with more renewables, might be higher. And these two effects trade off, and you would need careful modeling of what their net impact might be. And indeed, that's what we did in our modeling. We modeled the European electricity system. We modeled different zones within it, which are governed by availability of transmission interconnection. So we can have different prices within the different zones if the transmission lines are connected. And then we looked at, well, what does this look like from a renewable generator point of view? And here you need to think about, well, what might be going on in terms of the market situation. So we had some assumptions about how much renewables might be added by 2025. We had some baseline assumptions about what fossil fuels prices might be and what the carbon price might be. And then I'll just pick out one of the scenarios we looked at, which is this C2 scenario, where gas prices are higher than in the baseline and the carbon price is twice what it is in the baseline. And those of you who know about the carbon price in the European emissions trading system will know it's already up at about the level that we're modeling here under C2. So that allows us to look at what the impact might be for different generators within the system. And if we focus here on just two regions, the German region and the Italian region, and I've just picked out the German region, if gas and carbon prices are high, renewable generators can recover quite high wholesale electricity prices. And indeed, some renewable generators can recover more than the average wholesale generation price. If you're an offshore wind turbine, you tend to be generating in the high price hours, not in the low price hours, and you actually can recover more than the wholesale cost. So this fuel price effect could be quite strong and could support the natural rollout of more renewable generation into the 2020s, reducing the need for subsidy and under the existing market design. Now, when we were looking at this, we were using 2016 costs of new renewable generation, and we modeled, well, how much does the cost in 2016 need to fall in order to be supported by the electricity prices that we were modeling. And some of the results of that are here, and they show that the capital cost needs to fall by say 50% for some technologies. But actually, since 2016, we've already seen cost falls of that sort of order of magnitude for some of these renewable technologies, which suggest that the current market design will naturally lead to the continuing rollout of renewable generation. And you don't necessarily need a radical change to the market design in order to support ongoing decarbonization of the European electricity system. Now, that's good news for renewables, but that doesn't mean that the remaining gas turbines on the system don't have a financing problem. They won't be used as often, that's true. And our modeling suggests the need for continuing use of capacity markets and sharper ancillary service market pricing, in which pays gas turbines to provide ancillary services. Interconnection certainly helps, and if fossil fuel plants close more quickly than expected, then that continues to put pressure on the need for more reserve capacity, and for that to be financed. And certainly carbon pricing is playing a very important role in here in producing the merit order effect in the absence of high gas prices. And it interacts with higher gas prices in supporting the natural rollout of renewables and the maintenance of the current market design. Of course, if renewables roll out more quickly, gas prices are low, and carbon prices are not high enough. The positive situation for the current market design disappears, and some more radical market design may be necessary earlier. So, on the three questions that I started off with, in terms of how well is the current market design working in terms of supporting renewable rollout, market design questions remain, though as I speak to you today, the situation looks pretty good at the moment for renewables, given the current high prices in the European electricity system. It's certainly true that we need to sharpen ancillary service markets and reserve markets, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And our modeling suggested that as you roll out renewables, you don't suddenly observe a collapse in market prices. They might gradually fall as you add more zero short-run marginal cost electricity generation, but there isn't this sudden tipping point that you might worry about. Okay, let me move on to the second thing I wanted to talk about was, well, how significant do renewables need to be in a net zero Europe? And here we did another study for the same European think tank, the Centre on Regulation in Europe, where we looked at both gas and electricity demand hourly across the year and how that could be served within a zero carbon electricity system. We also had transport in there, but we didn't explicitly model what was happening in transport, though transport demand had to be met. Our modeling is very similar in nature to European Commission modeling for net zero. And our modeling does assume very high carbon prices by 2050. What you end up with if you do some 2050 modeling of simply, what would it take to decarbonize the 2018 energy system in Europe? Electricity turns out to be really significant in final energy consumption at current expectations of costs and prices in 2050. But it's not the only thing. So it's important to say that in Europe, you can't fully electrify the energy system. You're still going to have biomethane, hydrogen, and synthetic fuels produced from combining hydrogen with captured CO2 as important sources of energy in the 2050 energy mix. But the electricity system, it's true, is dominated by variable renewables. Of course, it's actually 78% variable renewables, mostly wind and solar. Partly what's going on is a lot of the swing demand for electricity is the production of hydrogen. So it's not that there's more electricity being produced than being finally consumed, because a lot of the electricity is being used to produce hydrogen. But renewables are going to be really important in the 2050 electricity system if we get to net zero. That's true. But there are going to be important roles for these other fuels, and it's going to be extremely challenging to meet net zero. We're going to have to scale up biomethane production of hydrogen, synthetic fuels, and bioenergy more generally. And carbon capture and storage turns out to be important. And if you don't scale these things up, you just won't reach net zero. So net zero across the energy system as a whole remains extremely challenging, but wind and solar remain absolutely critical to achieving net zero and require massive scale up even from today's levels within Europe to meet 2050 energy demands. Okay, let me finish with some interesting recent experience from Great Britain, where we have had a massive expansion of renewables. So if you look at that lower chart, we've gone from about 8%, 78% of total electricity generation being wind and solar to about 30% in 2020. It's been a huge expansion. It has been associated with some very recent rises in ancillary service costs. You can see a huge increase in 2020 in constraint costs. So not surprisingly, what happened in 2020, demand fell substantially. Renewables continued to increase, variable renewables, and constraints increased in the system. So this is where you're having to pay renewable generators to not generate and pay other generators to generate in order to meet demand on the system. And so this is one of the aspects of adding lots of variable renewables to the system. Sometimes they're generating too much electricity in the wrong places in your electricity grid. And indeed, together with National Grid, I've been doing some analysis of this recently in terms of what's been happening to monthly constraint costs and how they're related to the amount of variable renewable energy on the system. As you can see, in some months, so these are monthly figures, variable renewable energy hits nearly 40% of total generation. And indeed, the monthly volume of constraints seems to be positively related to the amount of variable renewable generation. You know, when you think about the Great Britain, there's a lot of renewables in Scotland. When that generation is peaking, that creates constraints in Scotland to get the electricity to the demand centres in England, particularly around London. These physical constraints in megawatt hours do translate into extra monthly constraint costs as variable renewable energy increases. Now that's the bad news. There is some good news. Okay, the good news is that this is looking at another aspect of ancillary service costs. So Joe was talking about frequency response. We've got a competitive frequency response market in the UK, which is procured monthly. And you can see what's been happening to the unit price of that. So it was hovering at around £10 per megawatt per hour up until early 2017. And then in this phase 2, it suddenly collapsed and the price went down to 2. And you can see that did impact the monthly frequency response procurement costs, which went down from about 6 million to about 2 million. So what was going on? What was going on was there was an influx of batteries into the market, helped by the fact that the size threshold for playing in the frequency response market was reduced from 10 megawatts to 1 megawatt. And the trading block, the window in which you could specify your availability to provide frequency response was reduced, making it easier for battery providers to know when they might be needed to provide frequency response. There were some additional attempts to procure batteries and get more batteries into the market. But this shows you that with a competitive market for ancillary services and with the presence of new technologies, particularly batteries, you can see a massive reduction in some ancillary costs in the face of rising renewables being added to the system. As a footnote, one of the reasons why the prices rose towards the end of that period into phase 3 was because some of the batteries left the market to go to another market, which was offering higher prices, which were fixed, which wasn't particularly smart of the system operator to manage the market in that way. So what can we conclude about rising variable renewable electricity in the system? Ancillary service costs are an issue. It is going to be more costly to manage the frequency and the power quality and also the reserves in the system with more variable renewables. This does seem to rise with more renewables. We're seeing evidence of that, potentially a threshold effect. Once you go above 20% wind and solar on your system, you see sharp rises in the requirements for ancillary services. Better modeling would help, and competition in the procurement of ancillary services, bringing in smaller providers and also new technologies such as batteries can massively reduce the unit cost of procuring ancillary services. And clearly, as a system operator, you do need to worry about co-optimization. Batteries can provide multiple services to the market, and you need to optimize them across multiple services. And also, you need to optimize ancillary service procurement against available transmission and distribution capacity and the right incentives to invest in transmission and distribution capacity. Okay, thank you very much, for listening, and I'm very happy to participate in any debate or questions.